Okay, so actually I just started making this video and the bell rang, and so I started over again. So on my screen it shows that I've written dative indirect object. I'm just going to copy over where I wrote that so that it shows up on this screen. Otherwise it won't know it's there. So in this video I'm going to be looking at dative, the dative case, its varied uses. So far, you've probably learned indirect object. We talk about it very early on. Do, dari, to give. You give something to someone. The thing you give is the direct object. The person who receives the direct object is the indirect object. So we will see an indirect object with verbs of giving, showing, and telling. Now, it doesn't have to be literally narrow to tell. I was saying narrow, so I started writing narrow instead of to tell. It's verbs that have that meaning can have an indirect object, because you can give something to someone, you can show something to someone, you can tell something to someone. An example of an indirect object, pueris, libros dedit. He or she gives the books, accusative direct object, to the boys, dative indirect object. Now that isn't the only use of dative. There are quite a few actually. You can also use dative with special verbs. Special verbs. You're like, well, what makes a verb special? Well, there are a lot of meanings that make a verb special. And it's not all the verbs that mean that meaning. So when you're using a new Latin verb and you're going to put something into the accusative to be a direct object, if it's a new verb, look it up in the back, because it may be that it takes the dative. I'm going to give you an idea of the types of verbs: to favor, help, please, trust, and their opposites. To believe, to persuade, to command, to obey, to serve, resist, envy, threaten, pardon, and spare take the dative. But there's so many exceptions, it's not worth memorizing it as a rule. Instead, we use the glossary, and it'll say in the back, takes the dative. It's also used with certain compound verbs. Now those, there is some value in specifying on these. It's compound verbs that have been compounded with certain prepositions. Ad, that to, toward, or near, anti, before, con, together, in, on, or at, inter, in between, amongst, ab, because of, on account of, post, after, prae, P-R-A-E, I have to think about that one. Pro, for, sub, under, super, over. Usually take the dative. The example in the book uses a pry one. Brutus, classi, pry, or rot. So a rot is that form of sum, he was, and the pry, in command. He was in command of the fleet. Brutus was in command of the fleet. And of the fleet goes into the dative, because you're giving those commands to the fleet. That's why the dative use is there. You can also have a dative of purpose. It denotes the purpose of an action. And it's often with another dative of the person who's affected, the dative of reference. The dative of reference is the person to whom an act refers, and that's why it's often with the purpose. When they're together, it's called a double dative. a double dative. So examples, magno usuis, nostris fuit. The legion, no, it was of great use, to our men. Purpose. It was of great use. Magno usui. Dative second, dative third. And then what about to our men? That's the dative of reference. They gave you the double dative right together. To our men. Nostris, our, men, because it's a substantive use of that adjective. So this is not only an example of dative of purpose with these, dative of reference here, which makes it the double dative. You can also use dative to show the possessor. And I know you're like, wait a minute, possession, that's genitive. Absolutely. But the dative can be used with some to denote a possessor. It has a different emphasis. So if I say est mihi liber, the technical translation would be, it is a book for me. We can say, I have a book from that. It is a book for me. I have a book. If I want to say, it is my book, it is, I will say, I don't want to confuse the issue, and I started to with the example that I gave. Genitive is a different statement. Genitive is hidden within another sentence, whereas this possessor ends up being really the whole sentence. It is a book for me. I have a book. Is the idiomatic translation. We can also use dative with special adjectives. If you've already watched the genitive video, I did talk about the genitive adjectives in that video. The dative adjectives, fitness, nearness, it is near to me, it is in close proximity, likeness to me, friendliness to me, care for me, and the opposites, hostile to me, all of those take the dative. Nobis sunt amici. They are friendly to us. This is the dative completing the meaning of this special adjective. Now, how did I know it wasn't they are friends? Because of the dative. The dative tells us that that's being used as an adjective. Because it can't be a dative indirect object, right? If it was a dative indirect object, we'd need a verb of giving, showing, or telling. They are friendly to us. How do I know it's not ablative? Ablative would be by, with, or from. There's no meaning that makes sense for ablative that you know yet or that could be used. I won't get into the tangent of what it could be similar to. Well, that brings us to the end of the dative. Thank you. Hope you have a good day.